Um, I have to say, I mean, I know it's customary to say thank you to be invited and very pleased to be here, etc. But I'm actually really pleased to be here because this kind of an interaction and discussion over these issues is really very significant in the current context of the way in which laws are changing and the way in which all kinds of developments are happening in the international market on traditional medicine products and so on. And I think that interventions, academic interventions of this kind are very, very significant, and we ought to take them seriously. And I think it's a great opportunity to be able to exchange views on these. I do want to say that speaking on this directive in 15 minutes is extremely difficult. I have a long paper, but I struggled and struggled to make a very brief presentation of 15 minutes. So you will excuse me, because I'm not going to exceed the time limit, I hope. But you will excuse me that I will simply skim over certain points. I'm making this apology in advance simply because I do not want it to be perceived as if we haven't done enough homework or not thought hard enough on these issues. Many of us have, and I will try to present some of them. And there's a lot of work going on this directive in Europe and in India. And I will just about be able to present the surface of the issues and the debates today. You know, as we know in India, I mean, Europeans have always been fascinated by so many things that have come from India, philosophy, religion, and indeed the East in general. And in recent times, this has extended to aspects of life that Europeans have felt their civilization has not been addressing, and health has been a very, very important dimension of that, balance between mind and body, and which is why we find yoga, meditation, and medical systems like Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine have found currency in recent times. The increasing popularity of these systems of medicine in particular have meant a surge in the number of practitioners, places of practice and products in European society, and increasingly in the European market. Here I would like to add that my understanding, and I'm sure many of our Ayurvedic practitioner friends who regularly do have exchanges and visits with their counterparts in Europe will tell you that actually the number of practitioners is quite large. They are certainly very small in comparison with the biomedical practitioners. In proportion they would be small, but for Europe, where Ayurvedic practice has been of recent origin, they're actually a very large number. And somewhat predictably, there has also been generated a very rigorous opposition to this trend. And the opposition to this Ayurvedic places of practice and products in European society has come from two quarters. The scientific community, especially practitioners of biomedicine, who are unconvinced of the scientific validity of the claims of these systems, and the modern pharmaceutical industry that believes that these new systems ought to be expected to conform to the same high-quality control standards that modern pharmaceutical companies are expected to comply with before they can enter the market. Hence, both of these actors have been asking for a level playing field to compete with the combined power of these systems of medicine. I'm providing, at the beginning, I should have said this earlier, a kind of context for this directive to have become operational. Because the directive in itself doesn't make any sense unless we know the context from which it comes. The European Union then has worked out a very important directive in 2004 to regulate the participation of the Asian systems of medicine and some of the European non-modern herbal medicines as well, called the Traditional Herbal Medicine Products Directive. THMPD for short, that's how we'll refer to it. This has come into effect in May 2011. The issuance of this directive itself led to controversy and strong opposition from both the industry of herbal and Asian medical systems and the practitioners of these systems, many of them Europeans who have deep faith in them. What is interesting is that in sheer numbers, whether of turnover or of loci of practice, there is no comparison between the scientific practitioners of biomedicine and the traditional practitioners, and also between the two industries, in Europe I'm talking about. Even in India there's no comparison in terms of the sheer numbers. The modern pharma industry and biomedical practitioners in Europe are by far bigger and much better organized. Yet the perceived threat has translated into policy very swiftly. So, I will come to this definition in a minute, but to go 10, 11 years before a newspaper article, just to quote, to give you the kind of context in which this directive comes. The demand for herbal products worldwide increased at an annual rate of 8% during the period of 1994 to 2001, and according to the WHO forecast, the global herbal market would be worth $5 trillion by the year 2050. This is the context. So even though there's a difference in proportion, the projected markets and so on are what are causing concern. Europe and the United States are the two major herbal product markets in the world, with a market share of 41% and 20% respectively. Germany and France are the most established markets with a share of 22% and 11% in Europe, respectively. And this is a newspaper article from 2001. That's more than 10 years ago. As you can imagine, the projections would have changed enormously. I deliberately chose a much earlier one just to be able to show you that it was already the case at that time. And that is what spins off all the legal developments thereafter. So this was typical of the enormous hype surrounding the international potential for Ayurvedic products in India, especially because developments in the United States and the European Union influence the international trade regimes and are particularly important because they are potentially the biggest markets for Ayurveda. So that has enormous implications for us as well. But it was not, so this perception in India and in Europe and the US leads to a directive in 2001 issued by the European Parliament and the Council aimed to include a new provision for traditional herbal medicine products. This claimed to offer a simplified procedure of registration for THMPs that are already in use at the EU. The THMPD 2004, the directive under discussion now, is based on this directive of the EU. 2004 is a precursor to 2011, which is why I said this is the one under discussion. So we begin with the definition, which has now been up for a while. So any medicinal product containing as active ingredients one or more herbal substances, or one or more herbal preparations, or one or more such herbal substances in combination with one or more such herbal preparations. You can see, Dr. Chopra was saying that legislation is really difficult to understand. You can see why. And there's such a complicated definition being offered. In addition, the product may contain vitamins or minerals or other non-biological substances for which there is well-documented evidence for its safety. The action of the non-herbal substances must be ancillary to that of the herbal active ingredients. What is important to note is that this definition of THMP relates only to over-the-counter remedies sold for, and this is again from the law, minor self-limiting ailments where interventions of a medical practitioner is not required. And it does not relate to products prescribed by practitioners of herbal medicine. This is where the complication starts. There are two aspects to this. Why I put up this definition? This is a difficult and complicated definition at the best of times, but just to highlight that every single phrase, the way in which it combines, whether it's herbal preparation, biological, non-biological elements, etc., has implications for every single kind of product that comes from Ayurveda, Unani, Siddha, anywhere, Chinese medicine, because we know that these products are plant-based predominantly, but not only plant-based as well. So we have an array of medicines which combine minerals, which combine metals, and we have techniques for doing that. And when you have this kind of a definition, this definition includes as well as systematically excludes. There's not enough time to deal with all the details, but I could actually deal with each aspect and we could talk about it. So I can see so many people who are here who are so knowledgeable about the details, and they would do much better job of me as well in explaining why every single aspect of this is so important. And how I will try and offer a little bit of an interpretation of the directive as well. It's not simply, which is to say that the main argument that I would like to make is that this kind of legal directive that is created in the European Union has enormous implications for the kind of products that we legitimize and the kind of products we delegitimize, and that has implications for the kind of system we project Ayurveda to be, or what we think is acceptable as Ayurveda. This carries a lot of subtexts which unfortunately I'm not in a position to discuss, but there are 3 dimensions which I will talk about. Number 1, that when there is an application for registration of any traditional herbal medicine product, you need to submit, number 1, a dossier containing pharmacological and toxicological tests and clinical trials. Now, these are particulars and documents which relate to results of physicochemical, biological or microbiological texts, as well as pharmacological and toxicological texts. This is really, really important, which are meant to prove 3 things: quality, safety and efficacy. Let me just go through the points and then I'll talk about what they mean really. The second is where the applicant can demonstrate by detailed references to published scientific literature that the constituent or the constituents of the medicinal product has or have a well-established medicinal use with recognized efficacy and an acceptable level of safety within the meaning of Directive 2001, etc. He or she should not be required to provide the results of preclinical tests or the results of clinical trials. So if you can provide a list of published scientific literature which establishes all these things, then you don't need to furnish all the tests and so on as in the dossier that is required in the first point. The third point is a significant number of medicinal products, despite their long tradition, do not fulfill the requirements of a well-established medicinal use with recognized efficacy and an acceptable level of safety, and are not eligible for marketing authorization. To maintain these products on the market, the member states have enacted differing procedures and provisions. The differences that currently exist between the provisions laid down in the member states may hinder trade in traditional medicine products within the community and lead, that's the European community, and lead to discrimination and distortion of competition between manufacturers of these products. They may also have an impact on the protection of public health. This is again a very, very important consideration when any law is being made, since the necessary guarantees of quality, safety and efficacy are not always provided at present. Now, these are actually, the directive is a long one, and the sequence goes thus, that there's a directive in 2004, the fundamental elements of the directive are taken over in there's a directive in 2001, these 3 fundamental aspects of that directive are taken over in 2004, and in 2004 the understanding is that this is going to be put out in the public domain for discussion and basically for understanding, and it will come into effect in 2011. April 1st of May 2011, which it did last year. Now, this is what is now governing broadly the whole business and the usage of Ayurvedic medicine. And I'll just stick to Ayurvedic medicines as of now. Ayurvedic products. Interesting. The transition of saying Ayurvedic medicine to product, because they're not being accepted as medicines at all in the first place. And to be accepted as medicine requires a certain, conforming to certain categories. And I do want to refer, to what was said earlier, that there are these standard categories that pharmaceutical companies are able to conform to, and these traditional medicine manufacturers need to come up to those categories. I might point out, as a social scientist, I have the advantage of knowing a little bit of history about these things. the regulatory mechanisms and rules and scientific requirements that we have grown in conjunction with the industry. So these don't come from some pristine scientific environment. If you look at the history of pharmaceutical industry in Europe, the regulatory mechanisms as well as the industry grow together and they influence each other immensely. And so even the creation of clinical trials, which are hotly contested even within the pharmaceutical industry, all of these are created as a result of the conjoining of science and industry in Europe. And so it's not some isolated regulatory mechanism to which all industries have to conform. But it is a regulatory mechanism which is based on the scientific premises and scientific categories and worldview and knowledge system, which is closest to biomedicine. And this is what raises the important questions for any law that requires that those categories have to be the ones to which all Ayurvedic or Asian medical products have to conform to. So this brings me to the three implications of these dimensions that I will talk about. It's not much time, I'll just quickly go. The first is that the tests and trials required are those in accordance with biomedical parameters, and so cannot be credible with reference to the epistemological parameters of Ayurveda. In India, this has been a very old debate. More than 50 years, we've had practitioners as well as scientists in communication. Dr. Bhatt talked in the morning about communication, and he's one of those who knows and understands that there's been a long history of communication, which has included contestation, debate, quarrels, but also agreements and great respectful understanding of two dominant medical knowledge systems in this country. And the debates have been precisely over the fact that the parameters that have been evolved for tests and trials for biomedical products will have to be revisited if we are to test Ayurvedic medical products for the market. There's no question that they should be tested for quality, efficacy and safety. There's no question about that. But what do the parameters have to be? That is a very, very important question, and there's been a long debate on this, and I have added my two-penny bit to this as well, so a lot of literature is available. What is interesting is that the EU makes a law, and they talk about published references to published literature, and in all the debates and discussions that are held in the EU, there is no reference to all the debates and discussions and writings and publications that have been available in India for the last 50 years. And it's amazing that you can make and I'm a public policy person, I'm a political scientist, and this is the disciplinary background I come from. When you make a policy, then you have to consider everything that is out there and take that into consideration when you're making categories and so on, which are going to have huge implications worldwide. That is very clearly missing in the entire EU directive debate when the policy was formulated. But there is a huge constituency arguing against it as well, and that's where hope lies that some of these things will be revisited. So, that sort of, I anticipated the point that I would have made, that the scientific literature referred to has not included that which has been published outside of Europe and the US, even in English. The reason I say this is when I have shared this with friends in Europe and said, surely there should have been reference to a lot of literature available in India. They would say very apologetically, those who want to consider, feel that Eurocentrism is a bad thing, they would say, sorry, but we don't read any other language than English. I said, but much of it is published in English, and that's something that they don't really feel that needs to be accessed. The third point is that the requirement of long use has meant only that within Europe. The EU directive, which allows for long use, does not refer to long use outside of Europe. So, but then it has not been in use, and the long use requirement is 30 years. But it has not been in use for 30 years in Europe. And you cannot say this for all the Ayurvedic products in Europe. Whereas, we can scream from the rooftops till kingdom come, that, we've been around for 3,000 years, please take us seriously. But this, as we know it, and as a political scientist acutely aware that this is an extremely unequal world, and it shows in this directive. The interesting thing is that the kind of lobbying and challenging that's been happening in Europe by Ayurvedic practitioners in Europe together with support from governments in India and China, has meant that they have really been able to push the European Commission. And in June 2011, there was a meeting in which, and there's a very interesting report, blow-by-blow account of that report on a website, which, if anyone's interested, I can refer them to, in which they show how the different questions put by the Ayurvedic practitioners made the European Commission representatives extremely uncomfortable. And at one point, they had to concede that surely there have to be different parameters and different laws for holistic systems. So they recognize that there's a fundamental problem here. And that is where the hope lies. There's a lot, as I said at the beginning, there's a lot that needs to be discussed, but we have two distinguished discussants, and I'm hoping that they will be able to take up some of these issues. But basically, this is what the EU directive is about. Thank you.